Hello, this is Brian Funk, and thank you for listening to the Music Production Podcast. I'm very excited to announce that my new book, The 5-Minute Music Producer, is now available in paperback form, a real book that you can hold and touch and turn to any page you like in a second. And it's a pretty big book, 629 pages of activities, exercises, and wisdom I've learned over the years. It's available on Amazon.com. 5-Minute Music Producer is 365 music-making activities that will help with your songwriting and music production. It'll help you fight writer's block, make more music, write better lyrics, develop solid workflows, learn techniques for generating ideas, and finish more music. It's like having your very own music production personal trainer giving you ideas and challenges each day. And the best part is the challenges are quick and easy, and they only take a few minutes. So even if you don't have a lot of time, you can spend 5 minutes and advance your music production skills. There's no better time to improve your music than now. Imagine where you'll be after a year of these activities. The 5-Minute Music Producer has hit the #1 new release in the music songwriting and music recording and sound categories on Amazon. So check out the 5-Minute Music Producer, 365 music-making activities. It's available on Amazon.com, or you can go to brianfunk.com/book. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk. On today's show, I have Keppie and Benny from How to Write Songs, the YouTube channel, the website. They've got courses available. If you've been listening, you've probably heard Keppie on the show. She's been on twice now, I believe. So this is the third time for her. I don't do a third-time conversation unless it goes really well. So that should be a good sign for everybody. And I'm really excited to also have Benny on the show for the first time because they're together doing really awesome stuff around songwriting. And I've learned a lot from their videos. I've been inspired by their videos. I've seen just about all of them following their work. And I'm really happy for all the success they've had. Keppie, I think since we first talked, the subscribers of your channel on YouTube, I think it's doubled. So it's been really cool to just see this thing happen. And the content's awesome. It's really useful, fun, practical. You guys get right down to the point and demonstrate. And you both have lots of real world experience. And it just makes for anyone that wants to write songs, regardless of genre, will really appreciate it. So I'm super happy you guys are both here tonight to talk, or this morning for you guys.
Here we are in the morning.
Yeah, I'm a day really behind you guys.
Yeah, exactly. The future is bright. So thank you for all of that, and that's so sweet. And yes, and I think in terms of the YouTube channel, Benny and I started the YouTube channel because I've learned so much from YouTube, and there are some really amazing people on YouTube, and it's just interesting that there's actually not that many practical songwriting channels, and Benny and I have this interesting niche in our lives, which is that we are both professional working musicians and songwriters, and we both happen to have been teaching songwriting in higher education for the last 10 or 15 years between us, So we sort of are both working songwriters, we do it, and we also teach people how to do it. And we both thought a couple of years ago, wouldn't it be nice if we got together and actually put our skill set to use for other people who want to learn how to write songs, essentially. And I'm sure I've ranted extensively about this on previous episodes with you, Brian, but to me and Benny, there is such a strong cultural mythology around songwriting as a thing you're either born with or not born with. You're either just bursting with inspiration or you shouldn't do it at all. Like if you struggle the first time, that it probably means you're not a good songwriter, and it's just a fascinating mythology that is entirely false. Because songwriting is really like anything else. Anyone can get better at it, with deliberate practice. But, I think possibly part of the cultural mythology is fed by the absence of practical guidance and really practical tools around songwriting. Like there's heaps of stuff out there about learning chords, learning guitar, learning music theory. But music theory is not the same as songwriting. You know, it's like no amount of music theory is actually going to make you a good songwriter, because songwriting is about what you do with what you've got, not about how many chords you've got under your fingertips. You know, you only really need, it's true, it's like 4 chords. But it's like what to do with those 4 chords, you know, and how to actually understand the relationships between that basic information that really creates good composition. So that's it. That was kind of our motivation, was really to kind of share the knowledge and experience that we've accumulated over the last collectively 40 years of performing and teaching, and share it with other people who might benefit from it. So it's delightful that we've reached a lot of people and are hoping to reach more people with our like short courses and workshops and all that kind of stuff too. So yeah. Benny, you got something to add?
I was just going to say, it's interesting that when I reflect back on when we first got started, you know, so many of these things are born from frustrations. And my frustration really was that being a teacher and putting together unit material and course material and even writing some of these units on songwriting, you're always looking for great resources. You're always looking for great interviews, and you're looking for famous artists talking about their process. And it's really hard. I found it really hard to get good content where these artists were revealing, you know, their process. And I think Song Exploded did it well. And The Writer Is another great podcast. Like, they're 2 of my favorite references. But I think they're 2 of my favorites because they sort of stand out as being 2 of the few that take you through this kind of, you know, as linear as it gets when talking about songwriting. So for me, it was just frustrating. And Keppie and I got together and we're like, how do we demystify not only the creative process, but the songwriting process? And then how do we kind of demystify this idea that it's all just a jumble of inspiration and going for long walks? Like, how do we talk about, you know, the fact that you can put together tools and practices and then test them and then iterate on them just like anything else? So yeah, I just think it was interesting that, you know, you hear about innovation always being born from frustrations, and certainly mine was a personal frustration. It's just not having access to these resources.
And like talking about that inspirational good songs are born of going for long walks, or just like divine moments of like, you know, the inspiration strike sort of thing. That the frustration for me is like in searching for that stuff is just the constant perpetuation of the mythology of the struggle, you know, that also like great songwriters are people who have just the darkest struggles of the human spirit and mind, and that is a easy story to tell for the media, which is why, and it's a seductive story to tell over and over again, and it's always shocking to me that it's one that still gets told again and again. And it's frustrating for a couple of reasons, right? Like for me, it's frustrating because like everyone struggles as well. Like it's you know, there is a spectrum of experience that every single human person, by being alive, by virtue of being alive, has stories to tell, you know, that it's the valuable stories and not just those of those who sort of descend into the darkest types of struggle and then implode completely, you know, but that is a dramatic story that therefore gets the sort of, in psychology, it's called the Vividness Effect. Do you know what I mean? It's like the media focuses on just like the worst case thing, right? Like the equivalent is shark attacks. Like, you know, how many shark attacks actually happen every year? Like a week. So as Australians, we know these statistics, okay, Brian, like off the back of our hand, right? Like, so like 8 people a year die from a shark attack. Do you know what I mean? Worldwide. But the vividness of the fear, and again, as an Australian, it's like you step into the ocean and the vividness of it is so visceral. But that's because like the media coverage of that thing makes it psychologically huge. It makes it seem like it's way more of a big deal than it is. Like, we should never be thinking about it.
Kept like when we go to America, like as Australians, when you're in America, I was shocked that, you know, all of these Americans were just kind of amazed that I was alive. You know, when I told them that I had lived my whole life in Australia, they're like, "But what about the crocodiles and the sharks and the spiders and the snakes?" You're like, how have you not been taken by one of those? And it's sort of, it's so interesting when you realize that, the perception of Australia to a lot of people who don't live in Australia is that you're just lucky to make it to 20 without being killed by one of those things,
But so the equivalent, right, is like as a songwriter that there's a vividness effect on the young, brilliant songwriter who self-destructs and dies at the age of 27. You know, like that it takes up so much more mythological space in the mind, I think, of our culture and young songwriters. Then it needs to. It's the equivalent of shark attacks. Do you know what I mean? Like, yes, it happens to some people, but that buries the story of the thousands and thousands of working songwriters who make a living, or, you know, let's not even talk about living, but just like do it in a lifelong way and do it well, you know, and the amazing songwriters who, have incredible careers. And it's not about self-destruction. It's about talent, discipline, and perseverance.
Yeah.
You know? And so, yes, there might be a talent quotient, but the discipline quotient is where we live. It's kind of like there are things that you can do to methodically improve your craft always, every day of the week.
I'd add to that, Kep, the talent, perseverance. What did you say? What was the order you said it in?
Talent, discipline, perseverance.
Talent, discipline, perseverance. I mean, that part is like the work of songwriting, and we talk about that a lot. But I think the other thing is trying to empower people, or something we've always tried to do is empower people to tell whatever stories they have to tell and feel that that's enough, rather than feel that you only get to write songs when it's about trauma, or that trauma is the only thing that makes good songs. And so that's a big deal, I think, to simply, even if you don't worry about the craft of songwriting at the beginning, if you can just get people to write about whatever it is that is their real lived experience and feel that that is enough and that is worthy of telling and that is interesting to people, because other people are living fairly ordinary lives as well. You know, that I think is a huge hurdle for people to get over and not feel like their stories are boring or crappy or not worth telling.
Yeah. You know, I think the shark attack thing is Jaws has a lot to do with that. I think once Jaws came out, it imprinted that in people's minds. And probably the Australian thing, like in America, we were given like Crocodile Dundee and like I think Steve Irwin too, you know, like people that were going out and like doing dangerous things. So that's what you think. But that idea of that like tortured artist is everywhere. And the first time I ever saw that kind of debunked, I'm so glad I got it too, because I was about like 14 or 15, just getting into guitar and writing songs. And that was right around the time of Kurt Cobain passing away. And there was this thought of like, do I need to have like a really bad life to make good songs? Do I need to like, you know, purposely sabotage myself so I can make music? But I remember reading Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins in a Guitar World talking about this. And I think they might have asked him like, do you need to have like trauma? And he's like, no. He's like, when I'm depressed and sad, the last thing I want to do is make music. I want to lay in a bed and not get out. But you need the other end of it to actually produce. It's like you could draw from these experiences, but and that's the feeling, right? Like when you're going through really dark times, like that's usually when like the guitar gets left in the case and you don't want to do any of that stuff. So as a teenager, I can remember, you know, you don't know anything really. So like that was a real thought I had in my head. Like, do I need to have like something happen to be an artist? And then you start getting these like weird, dark, almost desires for bad things to happen. But it's so nice that you guys are out there saying, no, like this isn't a practice, you know, and yes, you might have the music theory and stuff, but it's like being a carpenter and having all the tools, but not knowing what to do with them. When in reality, you can build a house with a saw and a hammer. You don't need all of that other stuff necessarily. So you guys do a great job in empowering, you know, Benny, you said, I think is a good word that you guys are bringing to people, empowering them to realize it's as much as it's art, it's also craft and it's also discipline, like you said, Keppie, and there's a talent component, but I think that's like the smallest ingredient from my experience as somebody that had none when he started.
Totally. And even like the perseverance component I'd say is actually, again, they're way more important than the talent, right? Like, it's one thing to have talent. It might be sort of necessary, but is not at all sufficient. You know, like you might have talent, but you need the discipline to actually bring the talent out, you know, to actually sort of exactly like work on the craft of things, to know essentially what to do with the talent that you might have, and to develop a sort of flexibility around it as well. You know, I think that talent without discipline can often end up doing the same thing over and over again, which will dry up very quickly, you know, but discipline and developing the craft itself is a way to actually expand your tool set, you know, to be able to go in different directions and know what to do with an idea that's different than what you did last time. And then that last ingredient of perseverance to me is probably like the key ingredient that makes the difference between someone who actually builds a career and someone who doesn't. You know, there's one of my favorite books, which I'm sure I've talked about before on this show, sorry I keep harping on the same shit over and over again, but is a book called Art and Fear by Bales and Orland. You know, if I could force artists in the early days of their career to read a single book, it's the book Art and Fear by Bales and Orland. And one of the things that they talk about in that book is that, you know, building a life and a career in the arts and the creative arts is really about learning how not to quit. You know, it's like every day at a certain point you'll wake up and be like, is it worth it? You know, given like all the insecurity and the doubt and there is no job at the end of this. You know, it's the perseverance quality is about learning how not to quit every day, you know, and to me that's part of it, is like the perseverance to just keep going is often the difference between, someone who sort of has a burst of talent and then gives up, you know.
Totally. Yeah.
There's a great, like, I don't know if it's a cliche, but I saw it first inside, I think, the weight room at the high school I work at. And it's just the big letters, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And it was one of those ones where I was like, yeah, actually, yeah. Like, you know, it's not just like something, you know, like coach yells at you in the locker room. It's like, it's real for everything. It's such an important thing to know, and especially with arts and music, there's this like idea of like the genius that was, you know, struck by lightning on the mountaintop and is the chosen one.
Yeah.
But also, I just want to add that you know, idea of the romanticism of the star that burns brightly and then burns out, you know, and the 27, you know, the list, you know, and the tragedy of Amy Winehouse and Kurt Cobain and all those other artists is that we didn't get to see what happened next. We didn't get to see them evolve as artists. You know, we didn't get to have them. I mean, I'm talking about that's the tragedy from an artistic perspective. The real tragedy, of course, is that they didn't get to live a longer life, you know, and that's where staying in the game for me as I get older becomes the only prerequisite. Whatever I need to do to sustain my enjoyment for making art becomes the thing that I need to do first. And I think, again, if we romanticize it for the younger people who are learning and think that that's what you got to give it all and you got to sacrifice a long, rich, happy life in order to have this creative, you know, fulfillment. It is a myth that has to be burst really quickly. And the more people that come out, like Jeff Tweedy, you know, in his book, How to Write a Song, you know, he talks a lot about this idea that, I'm so much happier now than I was when I was destructive and drunk and on drugs all the time. You know, like, this is better. I get to spend time with my family. I get to still make great music. I get to still be alive. You know, it's like he sort of really puts it down to that idea of if you're still alive and you're still in the game and you're still making stuff, you get the chance to do all the stuff that could be and might be, but I don't think we think about that when we're younger. It sort of feels just too, the romanticism is too appealing. So we need to nip that in the bud, I think, as much as possible.
Yeah, it's not glamorous. It's tragic, as you said.
Yeah.
And as an adult, I look at my students and I'm like, I wouldn't trade places with any of them. It's a rough time in your life. It's horrible to be a teenager, an adolescent in high school. Like, maybe towards the end it gets a little better, but I'll
confusing. Yeah.
I'll stick around here. Well, in that vein, And kind of the big impetus to get us all together here, you guys have this new course, the 5 Most Powerful Songwriting Exercises revealed.
Yes.
The pause between revealed is very important. You do it so well.
Yeah, well, we're finally gonna see behind the curtain here. But I mean, you guys deliver too. Like, the fact that you're showing it, you're saying these are techniques you can use. This will move you forward. It's not like so much in teaching, education, or even like things like fitness. There's these kind of like amorphous things that are supposed to bring you results, but you guys are really specific. Like, do this, try that, and I love that about what you guys do. And it's on Udemy. Is that how you say it? Udemy? That's how I've always said it.
We say Udemy.
Udemy.
I think
It's Udemy, and you can find it. And you've got a couple courses on there. But the fact that you guys are really breaking it down, and to just like to have things you can turn to. Like to say there's 5 things, there's 5 tools that we can do. So if I'm playing with my band and we need a song, we'd be like, all right, let's think with this 5. Let's try number 3 today. Let's see what goes on with that. So I wanted to ask you guys about that a bit, the course, and congratulate you guys as well for putting it out and finishing it. That's a feat in itself that takes a lot of perseverance and discipline and talent. So, and I'm excited to hear about it. Share it with everybody.
Well, and thank you. And the notion of it being like really specific and practical and immediately sort of evident and part of the way that we approach making those courses, and actually all our courses, is to demonstrate in real time. It's not a theoretical thing. It's not music theory. Like, there's sort of some gentle music theory concepts, but really it's about like, how do we turn this concept into songwriting right now and work through the concepts, so really like demoing them, and so people can really hear how, if you do it this way, it sounds like this. If you do it that way, it sounds like that. And the whole idea is to say, yes, it's not like a good chord progression is not just actually like slapping 4 chords together and playing them on a loop. Like a good chord progression really understands the different relationships between some very basic chords. But if we actually understand that, and so I'm actually just talking about like one of the exercises. So our first exercise in the course is all about understanding a basic concept between basic chords, like really simple chords. And if you understand this one concept, it's like the key to unlocking the balance of tension and resolution between sections. It's the key to creating effective contrast. And it all kind of stems, for me, from this story that happened 20 years ago. And like, Benny was there in the room with me. We've been friends for that long. So Benny and I, in a band together. So, and I recall vividly, because this affected me greatly and has continued throughout my life, leading up to this moment of talking about chords.
This is the trauma coming through.
This is the trauma. We all have them. So
if you've shared your work, you have to be vulnerable, and sometimes
exactly. I would not classify this as trauma. I would classify this as confusion that has led to clarity. So we were probably like early 20s. We were rehearsing for my first album release, and I remember I had this beautiful band. Benny was in it. We had a cello player, we had a drum player. We were rehearsing this song of mine, and I remember as we were rehearsing, like thinking about some arranging ideas, and I said to the band, hey guys, when we get to the second chorus, can we get maybe like a little more cello, a little less percussion, a little more lap slide, something like that. And, the band members all looked at each other and like smiled and nodded. And then someone, and I suspect it was Benny, turned to me and said, hey, Kep, which bit's the chorus? And in my mind, I was like, what the hell do you mean, which bit's the chorus? It's the bit where the lyrics repeat. Like, to me, it was so obvious in my mind as a songwriter. I'm like, it's the bit where the lyrics repeat. So, there's been a 20-year journey for me with that, which is the question of like, what is a chorus? Like, actually, if it's not just the bit where the lyrics repeat, because if my band could not identify which bit was the chorus, like, no one else is going to be able to identify it. No one else is going to hear that. So, like, if it's not just the bit where the lyrics repeat, what is it exactly? And then the other kind of stuff that comes out of that is just musically, like, oh, my band can't musically hear that this bit is different to that bit, So what are the musical techniques? What are the melodic techniques? What are the rhythmic techniques? What are the chord techniques that are going to help me put neon lights around the most important bit of my song? So I sort of had an instinct for a chorus, which I guess is like a thumbs up moment, is like at least I was trying, but kind of failing. And so a number of the techniques that we talk about in the course are really designed to understand how to create effective tension, how to create tension that then resolves, and in that moment of resolution, then we have the shining light that puts all that sparkle around an important moment. How do you approach melody? What are some melody writing tools and techniques that are going to inject a moment with that light that kind of, again, makes it brighter than everything else, that delivers it as the most important idea? So, again, I guess what does this all come down to? It comes down to the idea that there are specific tools and techniques that if you understand them and you implement them, and it's not just one thing, it's understanding the concept behind it so that you can then actually try it out different ways and still achieve kind of contrast, Yeah. Would you add anything to that, Benny?
I just think it's interesting hearing you talk about it through the musical lens. But another thing I think we try and do where we can, or one of the things I'm trying to do in class more with my students, is sort of say, look, you know these ideas or these concepts. These concepts are not new. So the idea of contrast is in all art. And you've always got a third of the students in class who are songwriters or love photography. And you go, talk to me about how photography works. Like you need contrast, right? If you don't have contrast, you don't have really any discernible image. You need the difference between the light and shade, especially if you're looking at like black and white photography. And they understand that entirely from a visual point of view, but they've never made the connection with music. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is also say we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just trying to take these really time-honored concepts that are across all art forms and say, how do we apply this to music and to songwriting? And another thing I think we're also trying to do is trying to give people a sense of control. And when I say control, I mean how to make deliberate choices, because really all of our techniques, we kind of start mapping them out generally at the beginning with that promise of how can we take it from a place of not feeling like you know what you're doing, randomly just picking chords or plucking some melody, ideas out of the air, hoping it works. How do we go from there to a place of I don't have guarantee that this is going to turn out as a great song, but I have control over the choices I'm making musically more often than not. And when you have control and you make a deliberate choice, you get to measure the effect or the impact. If you don't have any control over the deliberate choices, you're just sort of hoping, and then you get that one song that works out really well, but you're not sure why. And so it's really hard to replicate any of those techniques successfully. So again, I think you'll hear us talk a lot about this idea of contrast and this idea of deliberate choices or control over your choices as we move through some of these ideas.
Is it worth us demoing one of the concepts, Brian?
Yeah, I think you guys were saying you might share a couple of these different techniques. Okay. I would love that. Yeah, it'd be quite the honor. I love when you guys. Give a little, this is a perfect example of what you guys do. You don't just talk about it in theory. You guys do this, and then you demonstrate and you put it together. And you're both awesome musicians, so this is like a fun treat as well.
So should we talk about chords, Cap?
Go on, do it.
Talk about chords. Okay, so so many songwriters, and this is again something that you sort of discover when you've been talking to a lot of songwriters, and you ask them how do they start writing a song, which is a big challenge in general. How do I start? And I would say a lot of people default to this idea of playing around with some chords, and just messing around with a few combinations of chords as a way to get started. So if that's the way that a lot of people get started, then that's going to dictate the flow of the song. And again, which chords you choose, whether you realize it or not, the chords that you choose and the order you play them in is already telling a story before you even bring lyrics into the equation. And so we talk about this in the course. There's this very basic way to think about chords in a key, and that is that you have a home chord, which Keppie makes a beautiful analogy of like it's the sun, in the solar system. It's the thing that all the other, chords revolve around. So we've got the home chord, which is the key, the tonic, the central chord, and then you've got the other chords in that key that are the away chords. They're the planets revolving around the sun. So an example of that would be if we're in the key of C. There's our home chord. And the great thing about that is you can stay at home on that chord for like ever. There's no tension in that. We're at home. You're on the couch, you're eating chips. There's no need to go anywhere. It's beautiful, right? And what's great about that is if you can learn the basic chord theory of chords that belong in a key, you learn that there's the 7 chords that belong in a key. So we've got the 1 chord, we've got the 2 chord, we've got the 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, 7 chord, and we're back home, right? And again, all we talk about in the course, without going into too much theory, is this idea that if that's home, then all the other chords are away. And so let's say we wanted to talk about, or we want to create a feeling of being away. If that's what we want to do, all we have to do is pick any of those 6 chords that is not the home chord, right? So if I start playing a progression like this, and finally at the end, we got home. It was only at the end we chose to land on that home chord. So this is where it comes down to this idea of, can I choose when to be at home and when to be away from home? And once I understand that concept, can I then find some interesting ways to bring my listeners back home? And can I find some interesting ways to hold the tension by keeping them away from home? So really, that's all you need to know from a music theory point of view to understand how this exercise works. Kep, you want to jump in?
Yeah, and so like understanding that the chords, it's not just this mathematical concept of them just like, yes, okay, they're all in the same key. It's that the chords are really storytellers, and they tell a story. So as Benny demonstrated, like one way we can tell a story within a phrase is, we can start away. We can start on tension and create a journey back home. Or we could do the opposite. We could start at home, and the whole story, the musical journey, could be actually starting in a comfortable, stable place and then moving away into a place of tension. So that's like one really basic way that we can use it. We can also use this concept of there being like the stable, resolved home chord versus all the other chords that create various kinds of tension to create really effective contrast. And certainly coming back to this story about like a chorus, right? Like how do you put a neon light around a chorus? Well, we can use this concept. And so the first way that you can do it, which I think is really important because it's possibly surprising and probably defies a lot of the habits of songwriters, the habit being to always start on the 1 chord. Like people are like, right, I'm going to be in the key of C. It's like you put your hands on C. And actually, if we understand, well, make it a deliberate choice, because when you start on the tonic chord, you're telling the same story again and again and again. And there's a different story to be told, right? One of the stories that we can tell that's different than that is starting away from home and actually using the power of that tonic chord as a highlighting tool, right? Like as a way to actually make our chorus shine, make it land, make it really kind of like, that's the moment of resolution, right? So like I'll give you a demonstration. So we sort of in the course, we use this like little demo song, like it's just a little half song that we wrote to demo this concept, okay? So again, like I'll do it in the key of C. And so here's C. Here's our home chord. But let's strategically avoid playing C in the verse. So this is the first iteration of this that's going to help us hear the power and impact of a different story, right? A story that actually starts on tension. So I'm to kind of give a little think aloud here of what's going to happen so people can hear it. I'm going to sing the verse, avoiding the tonic chord entirely. And then what I'm going to do is you're going to hear, I'm going to play the tonic chord as the first chord of the chorus. And what you're going to hear is it really sounds like a chorus, right? Because suddenly it feels like, wow, we're home. Like, here is the resolution we've been looking for. And it has a power and an impact that exists only through contrast, right? Thinking of that photography example here, it's like I'm painting my verse in shades of indigo and whale grey, and then I'm bringing in this bright orange thing into the, right into the chorus. Okay, so here's me avoiding the tonic. Okay, so I'm driving down the nighttime highway, staring at the rearview mirror. What's far behind always seems much clearer. Can't take my eyes off you either. I don't know what I was thinking when I said, darling, let me go. I don't know what I was thinking. It's like my mind's got a mind of its own. Right? We all know where the chorus is. So here, just to kind of break that down for people listening, I'm in the key of C, but my first chord was F. My second chord was A minor. And then I played D minor. So, our ear has connected those sounds, but the thing that it has connected them to is actually the key center of C. But we haven't heard C, and so we're building tension. And so then I do the same thing again. F, A minor, D minor, and then I went to G, which is the 5 chord, right? Which is like what's called the dominant chord, which is the chord that builds the most tension, right? It's really desperately wanting to hear a C, and then I give it to you. Bam. And as soon as you hear the C chord, you're like, like all this tension that you might not even have known was there, but your body knew it, is released in that moment. And it puts this spotlight, it puts a neon light around that moment because I've avoided that chord. So there are lots of songs and songwriters that do this, and we can, in kind of thinking about them and talking about them, we can see that it's not a theoretical concept. It's something that great songwriters know, and will pull out of the bag. So, for example, the song Need You Now by Lady Antebellum, or Lady A these days, right? Like an old country pop hit. There is no tonic in that verse or pre-chorus. They do exactly this idea. They entirely avoid the E chord. It's a song in the key of E, and then it's the first chord of the chorus. And one of the things that makes it pop, I mean, there's other things, obviously, like the melody and the lyric, but chordally, that is a bedrock that is creating that incredible moment of the chorus landing. Even the song All of Me by John Legend, right, or probably his hugest song ever, is the same thing. I mean, the tonic is in the verse, but it's not the first chord. It's kind of almost treated like a passing chord. And so he avoids the tonic, that one chord, that home chord, in the big moments of the chord progression, but then the chorus is that G chord, it's that huge tonic chord that has exactly the same effect. So that's one version of it where we can just like basic understanding. It's like it's not enough to sort of know what chords are in a key. You sort of need to understand what to do with them, and that's the songwriting component of music theory.
And that was a beautiful demonstration of this concept we talk about, which is functionality, or what is the function of the techniques that you're using or the elements that you're using. And I don't think I ever learnt this as a young songwriter. I had to learn this, way later, and it's one of the reasons I love talking about it, because once you know that the function of the chorus is to, highlight the central theme of the song, to help deliver the main point or the main message of the song, then your decisions around how to do that become a little bit clearer. Okay, I need to create this contrast so that the chorus stands out as the moment where we bring it home and we make the main message land. How do I do that melodically, rhythmically, harmonically with chord choices? If we're not clear on that being the point of the chorus, and we're just sort of trying to put sections together one after another and hope it all kind of flows and fits in a way, then I feel like that for me was a huge learning moment in songwriting, where there was, the moment before that where I was just writing songs that were 4 minutes long and kind of worked, but I didn't understand the functions of any of my sections. And then there was the moment where I understood what each moment was trying to do in service of this message that you're delivering, or in service of this theme. So I don't know if that thinking about elements of songs as functions, it's just like you were saying before, the building analogy is great. Each tool has a function, and when you know what the function is, you get to use the tool properly. If you don't know what it's for, it kind of just sits there and takes up space.
Yeah, you kind of like just grab things and put things there and guess, really.
And hope, yeah.
Yeah. There's a nice thing that happens too. In that example, even that you played, Keppie, you're playing like, I think it was an F, then an A minor, and then a D minor. And those chords are, the key's still a little ambiguous, because that would work in F major as well. And then your melody is maybe teasing the C major in there, but there's a little this like ambiguity to it, which serves well for when the chorus comes in with this solid ground we're finally standing on. And even, I think your lyrics were, I don't know what I was thinking. And even though that's kind of like an unstable thought, it comes through as like a revelation, which has stability to it, and it has definition to it.
Great. And so that's a beautiful point, right, as well, like the way that chords kind of act almost as like the film score to the narrative that's happening in the melody and the lyrics. And then we can make deliberate choices about that. So, Benny was saying there are these tools that really are so important in understanding how to actually use them to create the effects that you're trying to go for. And in that version of the song, exactly as you're saying, Brian, like, okay, to put that big old major tonic chord under a phrase like, I don't know what I was thinking, yes, it makes it maybe feel like a revelation, but we could actually do the opposite, right? Like we can invert this whole thing. And to me, this is when it's like understanding the concept then makes it flexible, then makes it, you're able to actually meaningfully try different versions of it that aren't actually just throwing random things out there and hoping for the best, but actually meaningfully understanding what the different story is that we could tell. So like, for example, I could do the complete inverse of what I just did. So in that first example, I avoided the tonic in the verse and then I brought it into the chorus. I could do the complete opposite, right? And I'll do a version, and it's interesting to kind of think about like which one feels right, which film score here is actually sort of amplifying the emotion and making it more emotional. So like one version sounded like, I don't know what I was thinking, that sounded more like a revelation, but let's do the opposite where actually I'm going to maybe not entirely avoid the tonic chord of the chorus, but I'm not going to start on the tonic chord of the chorus. I'm going to have the tonic chord as the main chord of the verse though. So that's going to be different. I'm really going to play that C chord a lot in the verse. So we're actually going to start at home. And then the chorus is the bit that's actually going to travel away. So we'll start the chorus on a different chord, on a more unstable away chord, and see how it feels different and see how this film score implies a different emotional kind of landscape and then which one actually kind of fits what's happening here, right? So here's my C chord. Okay, what are my lyrics? Yeah. I'm driving down a nighttime highway, looking in the rearview mirror. What's far behind always seems much clearer. Can't take my eyes off you either. I don't know what I was thinking when I said, darling, let me go. I don't know what I was thinking. It's like my mind's got a mind of its own. Etc. Right, so the difference is the first version was, I don't know what I was thinking. Second version was, and I don't know what I was thinking. when I said, right? And so to some people, it might sound like an aesthetic difference, but to me, and I think actually in the bodies of listeners, it makes a huge difference. So I don't know, Brian, from your perspective as someone who hasn't written this little song, could you feel the difference and how did that feel to you?
Yeah, the verse is a lot more stable now. It's more centered, and then it's kind of like, but I don't know what I was thinking, Whereas the first time it's kind of like we're a little lost, we're not sure what we're doing with ourselves here. And then when the chorus hits, we're okay with it. We're like, it's like solidarity almost. As a listener, you kind of like, yeah, I know what it's like to not know either. But in the other one, it's when you start off the tonic on that F chord, it's definitely more like longing, more of a reaching feeling. It does change it a lot, and it sounds very similar at the same time, but it is like a feel thing. To really pay attention to like what direction the chords are kind of pulling you or not pulling you. That's a great example. It's a great exercise, and it's something to really play with in your songwriting, to just swap out a chord here or there and for me, when I do things like that, I sort of have to really like almost stop and come back to it, stop it and like listen back or absorb it a little bit, to like, how is this making me feel? Like close my eyes or something and just pick up on it. Cause so much of the actual notation, it's probably just the difference of like playing the F note versus the E note in those chords and the A and the G, I guess. Two notes are different, right? So the changes are really minor, but they make a big difference. Minor is in small. Minor is in small.
Smaller or small. And to your point, Brian, it's really hard. I think, firstly, some people might be thinking, I don't know that many chords. And you actually it doesn't matter if you only know 3 chords. Sitting down and changing the order of those 3 chords will result in a different version of the song. And, so the first thing we're trying to say is like, find the version of the song or the version of the story that you want to tell, not the one that just happened to come out because you didn't, know what to do next. Actually try a different order of the chords, and one of them will feel like the one that tells the story you wanted to tell in the first place. But then, also when you're sitting there and you're just listening to it and kind of trying different orders, it all starts to sound a little bit blended. And you go, I don't have the perspective now to know. And this is where like everyone has a phone these days with a voice recorder. I record all my versions in 30-second snippets and play them back. And it's amazing that when you hear it back, as if someone else was playing it, you have this whole other, perspective. You get the distance required to go, oh, clearly number 3, or clearly that one or that. You think it sounds one way when you're actually playing it, and then you hear it back when you're just listening, and just listening and not playing and listening at the same time changes everything. So I would say that is also a game changer for anyone who's trying to review their work and make decisions and work out which path to take. Recording snippets quickly and listening back to them is like, it's really valuable.
Yeah, because this gets like intellectual in a way, right? Like, because now we're thinking like, well, this chord fits. Let's listen to this one, and now we're not, because this is the challenge of what we do, right? Because you have to be intellectual in one way, but you also have to feel it. You got to like listen with your brain and listen with your heart, and sometimes it's hard to do that. I had this experience playing with the band, and I was just doing a little kind of riff to bring the progression around again, almost like a fill. And I played it one way with all the notes that hit like right on the chords where they're supposed to. And it was like the right way to do it, And then I did it again kind of by mistake, but I changed the notes a little bit where they had more tension. And I was like, what do you guys think? What's the difference? And I was like, I can't even tell. But then after listening to our practice back, it was so obvious that it's the one with the more tense notes, because we're trying to like create this like pull back into the next part, and it fit the feeling of the song, which was sort of like an awkward feeling to begin with. So, but I couldn't hear it while I was playing it. It was just like, when I was doing these two different versions of this riff, I just felt like, how do I pick between these? What, like, I just couldn't. And then I started thinking like, well, maybe I should do the one that's like more like musically intelligent. And then that was just like the wrong way to go about it. But like you said.
But I would say in terms of like, the thing that I would say there as well though is that it is now something that has a tool-like quality to it for you now. Like through learning through that experience, you can now deliberately access that decision faster. Now you've got a little tag of knowledge in your mind that is like, and Brian, are you on bass or it's the bass, right?
Guitar.
Guitar. So like, like you've got this thing that's like, all right, I could by playing just the right chord notes, it has one effect. But if I want to create more of a pull, more tension, more, interest leading into a section, actually going for these more tense notes creates that effect, And again, it's like, it's all depend on the song, to a certain extent, what kind of feels right. But now that's something that you can kind of log away as a deliberate choice that you have access to and can kind of access a bit faster as a decision next time.
Well, based on what you guys are saying.
And I think that's a lot of what we're trying to,
Yeah, sorry, but based on what you guys are saying, it makes the choice obvious as well, because that section of the song in particular is an away type of section. We're not playing the tonic chord at all. We've moved from that. And the whole point of sticking this section in there was like, we're getting kind of tired of this thing happening over and over again, because actually the verse and the chorus are like the same chords, just played a little differently. So it needed something to pull us away. So to then play the notes that pull us away further, like what you're saying is kind of like what I needed to hear at the time. It might have been like, yeah, of course I got to play those notes, but I needed to hear it to get that sense.
And we can't, like the principle underlying this is like really simple. Like we all know that coming home after being away on a holiday, like it's a thing. Like it feels amazing. You can't come home unless you've been away. And in music, you cannot have any release without the tension first. So they're working together, and they're absolute requirements for the experience to be in any way interesting or immersive. We just have to acknowledge that to get one, we have to have the other, playing its role, and be a little deliberate about when we deploy each technique. It's I think the film score analogies are beautiful as well. Like what is the film you're trying to create for people in their mind, as they're hearing your song and feeling your song unfold.
I like to stay home a lot, so now you give me a good reason to go out, because I can't come home until I leave. But it's like the best part of going anywhere is coming home. but it's true, and it makes a lot of sense in this situation. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, totally.
That alone is just so helpful, because it helps so much of like writing a song. As you get a part you like, oh, these are cool chords, this is a nice riff, now what?
Yeah, and look, the other thing I'll kind of add on there though is like you were talking about before, Brian, that there's a moment where you can get overly intellectual about things. And in the college and university classes I teach, there's always a point in the semester when I can see this look on my students' faces, and I just check in with them and be like, how are you guys going? And there'll be a sense of overwhelm. Like, are we honestly meant to think about all of this stuff when we sit down and write a song? Like, we're adding all this information, all this knowledge. Like, how am I ever meant to write a song again if when I sit down, I'm thinking about all of this information? And like, my class is one of 8 classes that they're taking,
I got a checklist with like 85 items,
Totally. And so, for me, even if you're not in a college class or, studying music formally, if you're just a songwriter acquiring information and acquiring tools, that question comes up like, okay, should I be thinking about this when I sit down to write a song? Like, the answer is no, not necessarily at all. And do I? No. I mean, to a certain extent, sometimes I think that at this point, like a lot of people who do something for a long time, the skill or the tool starts to become muscle memory. So there's a certain extent to which these relationships between chords are now part of my creative process. You know, they're part of my intuitive approach. Even when I'm sitting down not thinking about them, I still know them. It's like driving a car, you know. But I will say that, you know, for people just in the early stage of acquiring skills, gathering information, gathering knowledge, where that knowledge still exists in the conscious realm, where you have to consciously reach for it, that question of like, should I be consciously thinking about this stuff as I sit down? I really think there's kind of two answers to that question. Okay, like one answer is, no, you don't have to at all. You can just sit down and intuitively write. The moment when it becomes wonderful to bring it into the conscious realm and to deliberately think about it is either in revision. You know, it's like once you've got a couple of sections of a song going, to sit back, look at it or listen to it and just ask yourself, like, what do I have here? Like through this filter, through this lens, if we're just talking about chords and chords in relationship, let's say to the tonic, to the main home chord, what have I got? You know, okay. And if you take a step back and you can see a song that you're writing and you go, oh, okay, I've got the tonic as the first chord of the verse and the first chord of the chorus. Now I can engage that information and go, is that giving me the effect that I want? Or is it actually working against a feeling of contrast, a feeling of creating, you know, a movement, a journey from one section to the next, right? And so then you can consciously see that because now you know about it. And then you can try out different things, understanding what it is that you're trying out and why you're trying that out. So to me, it's a great tool for a little further down the track when you've actually got something on the go, and then you can start to access this conscious information. The other answer, right, to me is like, yes, use it consciously if that feels like a creative act. And for some people it will and for some people it won't. But I tend to be that way. Like for example, I enjoy setting up a rhyme scheme before I even sit down to write a lyric. Like that to me is a creative parameter. It's a limitation that will frequently force me to do something that that's different than what I might habitually sit down to do, right? So, you know, there are basically 3 rhyme scheme cliches that almost every songwriter will write in, right? And those rhyme scheme cliches, if we talk about rhyme as being like if we say A, we mean those 2 lines rhyme together. If I say a rhyme scheme is A, B, it means line 1 and 3 rhyme with each other and line 2 and 4 rhyme with each other, right? So there are 3 rhyme scheme cliches. 3 things that most songwriters do again and again and again, unless you consciously think about it. Those rhyme scheme cliches are A, B, B, right, which is to say I'm just writing and rhyming couplets. If people are particularly experimental, they're writing A, B, which is what's called a quatrain, like a quatrain. And look, a quatrain technically has a rhythmic thing to it too. But in terms of rhyme scheme, it's a 4-line section where the rhyme scheme goes A, B. And if people are really radically wild, they might do X, A, where X is unrhymed, right? But that's kind of it. Like, you know, if people don't consciously think about it, it's just those 3 things over and over again, which I feel like is sad. It's a sad thing if you spend your entire songwriting life doing the same thing over and over again, right? But for me, I'm exactly the same. Unless I'm consciously thinking about it, I will do it over and over again. So for me, it's a really creative act to actually deliberately think about rhyme scheme and to go, you know what? No, I'm going to do something else, you know. And again, it's like if you look in great songs, you see different rhyme schemes. Like I was literally looking at yesterday at Phineas's song, A Concert 6 Months From Now, and I noticed immediately that he has a rhyme scheme that I love, but is a rhyme scheme that you wouldn't do if you just are defaulting to the same thing again and again. And so the rhyme scheme in the verses of that section is A, C, B. And so what he's actually doing there is creating these little kind of 4-line structures, but instead of resolving the rhyme scheme, line 4 actually leaves things open. It leaves things unresolved. It's like a promise that things will resolve, but not yet, right? And so what it actually does is creates a much longer arc of tension and resolution. See, everything comes back to bloody tension and resolution. But if you don't know that rhyme scheme can do that, you'll just do the same thing over and over again. You know, so look, all of these skills and tools and whatever are like yes, maybe we think about that in revision, or maybe for some people that's a creative act to actually set yourself a goal to write an 8-line verse section with a specific rhyme scheme. And again, like for me, that is very creative. That's very inspiring. Giving myself that parameter actually kind of almost like propels me into an idea. It's almost like a funnel that sort of squeezes the energy, and creates more energy. So I enjoy that sort of thing. So all of that is to say this concept of when you're acquiring information, how to deal with it, how to deal with the overload of information. Do you deal with it consciously, unconsciously? It sort of depends where it's helpful in your creative process. Yeah.
Can we just drill down for a second on how valuable that idea of putting it up front is? Like Kep said there, using the technique as a song starter, I just think is one of the best things that any songwriter can do. If you want to get used to a technique, if you actually want to embody a technique and get to know it, put it up front and just own it. Sometimes you can write a song and say, I'm just going to focus on this one technique and I'm going to literally put it all through the song just so I get comfortable with how it works. But the other thing Kep and I hear probably more than any other problem is how do I start? How do I start when I feel like it, when I don't feel like it, especially when I don't feel like it? How do you start then is really challenging, right? And for us, part of making the songwriting practical is in saying, right, well, let's take a parameter or call it a limitation and turn the limitation into an advantage. Because one of the big things that cripples a lot of people is like, if I could write about anything and I've got all of these techniques that I've been writing down and I know all my chord theory, where do I start? And so you go, it's like that paralysis of choice. You just go, you know what? I'll just go for a walk, which sometimes does yield great results lyrically. But taking a limitation, I haven't found a better way to write a song consistently each week, over a long period of time than saying I'm going to take this limitation. And it might be to write a song in a key you've never written in, to take a mode you don't know and learn it and write the song based on that. We've got lists of song starters that we put out as parameters, and they're amazing because you don't have to feel inspired. You just have to stick to the parameter and put your ass in the chair and get to work. So I don't know. I think that is one of the I think that needs to be talked about more, that limitations are actually your best friend when it comes to creative work and songwriting.
Yeah, a little activity to do and build it around that. A little exercise. That helps me a lot. I'll learn something. Sometimes it's a sound even. It's like, I like this sound that I have in my DAW. I made this cool instrument and I want to use it. And just like a place to go from. Or I learned like this cool way to switch keys. Let's see if I can work this into something. And that is very helpful for me from pulling me out of the I don't know if I really feel like doing it today. Into at least sitting down and starting. And generally, once I start, I like doing it. So something happens and you get excited. But to wait, and that feeling, applies to production as well. I have 700,000 kick drum samples. Which one should I use? I don't know. But when I only had one drum and a microphone, it was easy. All right, put the mic on the drum. Boom.
Yeah.
You're good to go.
That production idea is amazing. Like I will write songs where I take a delay plug-in and I just say, I'm gonna wring every bit of value I can out of this delay plugin and put it on all these different instruments and just see what kind of cacophony I can make with overlapping delays. And it's just like having a new toy. Like it just becomes fun. And then eventually you find your way through that initial experimentation into something that's starting to sound good or sound like it has a structure. And then we're in the game, then we can start laying other things over that structure. But yeah, I think gamifying production and treating them like new toys, like getting a new plug-in and just messing with the preset is like, that's endlessly creative.
I find that in terms of actually like songwriting, that the magic for me happens actually in the overlap between two ideas, so I'll often sit down with one kind of musical thing that I'm going for and then one lyric thing that I'm going for. And so, for example, in this last week, so I run a songwriting group and I run a bunch of songwriting groups that anyone can join. But in my own songwriting group, I gave the prompt. There was a lyric prompt, and the prompt for the previous 2 weeks was to write about a place, and to make the place really a character and to really vividly, describe place and make that a really important feature of the song lyric. So that was kind of the only prompt, right? And then for me to actually then start to turn it into a song, into a musical experience, the parameter I gave for myself was, you know what, I'm actually going to start this song just with a pedal point, actually no chords at all, just one note. So I sat down and was just playing a note and I was like, yes. And because when you're just playing a note, the chords aren't dictating your melody. The melody can really float around that note. And I found very instinctively, when I was doing that, it was the melody became modal. The melody came out very mixolydian, which is, like a mode. It's nothing more fancy than the major scale with a flat 7. That's what mixolydian is. But it was cool, right? To sort of sit down, and then as I was just pedal pointing, then it a different melody came out when I wasn't just defaulting to chords and chord changes. It sort of let the melody really shine. And then to me, it's always that the great spark is always the cross-pollination of a musical parameter and a lyrical parameter. And when I've got those two limitations together, inevitably, as you said, Brian, you sit down and you start playing with it and something happens. All you have to do is gamify it. So I'm just going to sit down and do this for 10 minutes, and then an hour and a half later, you blink and you're alive again to the real world.
Those make sense too, because a pedal point, it's kind of like a place. It's one note. It's just one spot in the key, in the scale, whether it's the tonic or whatever you decide it to be. That's a place. And now to put the lyrics around that place, it's funny how, I don't know if that was deliberate for that thinking, or if we're able to sort of connect the dots in retrospect, but sometimes you start to see how, hey, this works with that because of something. So there's something in common here. There's something at work. There's some relationship.
Totally. Or that sort of visual image of a Venn diagram, right? Like the musical sort of character of that. How does that overlap with the imagery that I had in my mind? And actually it's in that area of overlap where it comes out. So maybe naturally the kind of lyrics that come out are going to speak, are going to feel connected to that musical feeling, because of the exactly that kind of overlaying of the two things onto each other. Yeah. And then even in talking about contrast, right? That's a musical choice in the verse to just do this pedal point that then very consciously, and here's where that sort of conscious musical knowledge mixed with intuitive stuff, I guess, comes out, is going, right, I can only hold this pedal point for so long. And it's going to build tension, but I actually need to release that tension at some point, because I always use this image with an elastic band. So people who are just listening to this aren't going to be able to see this. I don't even have any elastic bands, but usually when I teach a class on this concept of tension and release, it's there you go, Brian, you can do it. So thank you. So if you stretch it out, which is to say you're increasing tension. The thing is, if you just hold it like that, eventually it just goes loose. Do you know what I mean? Just holding tension itself is meaningless. Tension is only functional when you release it and it shoots across the room. Go on, Brian. There it goes.
It's kind of weak, but
so casual.
So casual. The exciting bit of tension is actually when it releases. So coming back to that specific musical idea, holding a pedal point and a melody just going around this pedal point, that's creating tension. But if I actually just keep it like that the whole time, then it's going to become weak. Do you know what I mean? The strength of tension is in the release. And so in holding that pedal point, it's actually then moving somewhere else and then creating quite a lot of harmonic movement that you get that feeling of release, which feels so good. And that's really the dance of music. The dance of music to me is all about the dance of tension and release.
And to make that practical, I just want to emphasize this idea that Keppie knows all the notes, all the notes. And that means you could forgive her for sitting down and saying, I'm going to write a really cool 10-note melody. There is this secret, I think, that, we don't talk about enough, which is the more you know, the more it's important to simplify and reduce, down to like a single note. So a pedal note is just that single note. Because simple is really hard, and when I was young, I thought simple was like cheating, or it just wasn't, I had this inverse appreciation of it. And as you do more and more music and more art, you realize that simple is really hard. And you listen to a Jason Isbell song and you go, how is he doing that? How does he make it so big and beautiful and rich, but it's also simple in its architecture? And so this is one of the things that, again, to make it really practical, is an important thing for us to talk about and to do as songwriters, which is, writing a song with 8 chords that are moving around quickly is kind of, it's overcomplicating it. If you can just play one chord and just start there and just see, Kep and I talk about this idea of trying to write a 1-chord song challenges you in so many ways, because if you haven't got the chord movement to do any of the heavy lifting, you learn a lot about melody. You learn a lot about rhythmic phrasing and, timing as the things that are bringing the contrast. And so again, like lots of things shouldn't be moving around all the time. You can get there at the very end, but at the very beginning, it should be so simple that it forces you into creative acts just because of the simplicity and the rawness of that moment. And I think that's something I need to do more often and remind myself of constantly.
I'll get sometimes very like intellectual and think I need to be smart and intelligent about my songwriting, only to realize like so many of my favorite songs are really simple. They might have like a little twist, kind of like you guys are saying, like there's like a thing that happens. There's that one chord is substituted, but otherwise it's the simplest thing. And that's sort of like where the magic comes in, where just a couple of these things come together to serve the purpose of whatever you're trying to do.
One of my favorite songs, Bruce Springsteen songs, is a song called The River. And it's a beautiful example of the very concept we were talking about when we were talking about the chord exercise, the tonic and awake chords. That song is literally a 3-chord song, and the sort of classic country roots folk 3 chords. It really is 1, 4, and 5. But how does he use the 1, 4, and 5? Well, there's a lot of the 1 in the verse and almost none of the 1 in the chorus. It's like, that's it. It's just using that basic contrasting feature of these basic chords, but using them really cleverly. It's like you said, it's the architecture of it. It's not just the same chord progression on a loop. It's really understanding that you've got a lot of the tonic in the verse. Well, it's going to feel really different. It's going to create a journey to then avoid it almost entirely in the chorus. But very, very basic and just simple, but well built, well constructed architecture is exactly the right metaphor.
Very nice. It's so funny you mentioned that, actually, because I told you I was going to have a conversation with Matthew Dix on the podcast. He wrote a story where he'll probably be one of the episodes before this one. And I asked him your question, about songwriting and songs that he thought was, and I'm pretty sure he said The River by Bruce Springsteen, that specific song. So talk about like minds and, people on similar wavelengths. It's pretty cool.
That's amazing.
So you already knew the answer.
I knew it in my soul. Yeah,
right.
That's so funny. That's great.
Well, I think we're kind of getting near our time, right? So, I would steal you guys away for much longer, but I want to have the chance of you coming back someday. So we should tell people where to find you guys. There's howtowritesongs.org. I believe it is, right? .org.
Correct. Yep. That's the website.
You've got the YouTube channel, How to Write Songs, which is just loaded with all this kind of stuff. There's a really good video, Benny, that you did on chord progressions, and you went into a lot of detail. And it's a couple months back, maybe now.
Yeah. Picking the perfect chords, I think.
I love that one.
Yeah. Goes through a lot of what we were talking about today. Yeah.
Yeah. You even get maybe even a little bit more specific about the different types of how the 4 is sort of like home. It's almost like a vacation home or something.
I think I get more specific about the functions, not just being home and away, but the little specific functions within the away chords. Yeah. So that was a fun video to make, actually.
I appreciated that video a lot. And it's stuff like some of it I've like felt intuitively, but the way you just articulated it and demonstrated it was just great. So the YouTube channel, of course, is just loaded with stuff like that. And then on Udemy or however you want to say it, the 5 most powerful songwriting exercises revealed.
That's it. Oh, thank you. Oh my God, I interrupted it. Do it again, Brian, because I can't believe I interrupted it in the most important.
You can go to Udemy to check out the 5 most powerful songwriting exercises revealed. And we got a taste of 2 of them today, right? The rhyme scheme and the also just about like choosing the chords. The rhyme schemes, that's really, to me, I think of it almost like so the example you gave with the Phineas song, I'm sorry, I'm extending this, but you said like it was like A, B, and then C, 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 B again.
Correct.
That first B and that last B, it's almost like the 5 chord. You know, it's like that like we know the thing is coming, and it extends the life of your verse through that rhyme scheme, because after you hear that first verse, now you expect it, and you're like okay with this longer verse. You've got a reason to stick around because you're like waiting for the payoff.
Totally. So it's actually more like the 5 chord in the middle, but then the payoff and the resolution of that kind of dangler is like the tonic chord. It's almost like avoiding the tonic chord until the end, and then we hit that tonic chord and it's like massive resolution. The other like payoff thing that I think is so important to understand about rhyme scheme, which is again really important about rhyme scheme, it's not just that it creates a longer arc of tension and resolution, which creates sort of more cohesion and more interest. The effect is really this. When you are able to create more tension, the resolution of that tension is actually more powerful, more impactful, and more emotionally weighted, which means if you actually understand something about rhyme scheme, that it's not just constantly needing to resolve, and that it's not, rhyme scheme is not actually just because it sounds good, that rhyme scheme is actually about creating a pattern, and in using the pattern in the way it can be used is creating tension and resolution. The more tension you're able to create through pattern, the deeper and more impactful the resolution, which means that resolving line actually sort of feels more emotionally weighted for a listener than if we're just constantly resolving rhyme every 2 lines or every 4 lines, right? Like we're never going to achieve that sense of an idea landing with that full weight and impact if we are constantly just defaulting to the rhyme scheme cliches. So one of the exercises in the course goes into more detail and shows lots of different other kinds of rhyme schemes that you can use, and sort of how and why you would use those different rhyme schemes.
Yeah.
Very nice. I appreciate what you guys are doing very much. It's so helpful, and it's going to make better songs in the world. So we're going to get better music thanks to you too.
Thanks, Brian.
So yeah, anyone listening, definitely make sure you check out Keppie and Benny with howtowritesongs.org, how to write songs on YouTube, on Udemy. There's just so much to learn. And it's not a genre thing. It's not a style thing. It's so applicable to just understanding the way songs work and how they move us. It's all about the emotional impact, and you guys just give us the tools on how to find that. So thank you guys for your work, and thank you for everyone for listening to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for having us.
Hey, if you enjoyed the Music Production Podcast, please consider giving it a review on your favorite podcast provider, and share it with a friend, somebody that you think might enjoy the show and get something out of it. That would mean a lot to me. And if you want to check out more of my work, including sound packs, tutorials, etc., head over to brianfunk.com. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.